Let's get a grasp here first, before we go any further, of what we're talking about. Self-awareness. Say to yourself, I am aware that I exist. Be aware. Just for a moment, say to yourself at home and here. You are aware that you exist, okay? The self-awareness. There's the self and then the self's awareness of his own existence. That's what we're referring to here. That even if we were to conclude that all these other machines are empty in this room, and it's just me, I'm still aware that I exist. Yeah, yours.
How do we know that this self-awareness isn't some kind of illusion already programmed into us?
This is what a lot of scientists are saying, very influential scientists. They're saying that, in fact, self-awareness, the self, that is, I am aware that I exist, this inner awareness that I have that I exist, that in fact, this is just an illusion. This is just an illusion. The self is just an illusion, and self-awareness is just an illusion. It's actually just a characteristic of a complex machine. When a machine gets very complex or something, then this illusion of self-awareness comes about or something, okay? One very influential scientist in this connection, his name is Francis Crick. He's a co-discoverer of DNA. Very influential. He's writing in a very important scientific journal, the Scientific American. And listen to what he's saying here. This is basically what he's saying. He says, quote, "Is there any idea that we should avoid?" He says, "I think there's at least one, the fallacy of the homunculus, the self. Recently, I was trying to explain to an intelligent woman the problem of understanding how it is we perceive anything at all. And I was not having any success. She could not see why there was a problem. Finally, in despair, I asked her how she herself thought she saw the world. She replied that she probably had somewhere in her head something like a little television set. Okay? She says, well, maybe in my head there's a little television set. He's asking, how do you perceive anything? Just like at home or here, you're perceiving me. Okay? And he says, well, how is this happening? How do you perceive anything? Well, maybe in my head I have a little television set. Maybe there's a little television set in my head. Okay? And then he says, so who, I asked, is looking at it? Who's looking at the TV? She now saw the problem immediately. Is there anyone in there watching the TV set? In other words, is there self-perceiving out into the world? He goes on, most neuroscientists, brain scientists, right? Most neuroscientists believe there's no self or homunculus in the brain. Unfortunately, it is easier to state the fallacy than to avoid slipping into it. The reason is that we certainly have an illusion of the homunculus, the self. There is probably some good reason for the strength and persistence of this illusion. So, the awareness that you have that I exist, the I who's looking out into the world, perceiving the world, according to these people, does not exist. There is no I or self looking out through the eyes, perceiving the world. That's just an illusion. Okay? It's just an illusion. There is no self. You at home who are looking through those eyes at this picture here, you don't really exist. You don't exist. You are not actually looking out into the world since you don't exist. So he's saying basically, Crick is basically saying that there is perception, but there's no perceiver. So he's saying then, and this is what stumps him, this is what gets him very, confused. How can there be perception without a perceiver, you see? That's why the lady got confused. Well, gee, that's a real problem. How do you perceive anything if there is no perceiver? So they're sitting around trying to figure out how there can be perception without a perceiver, you see. So they're saying that self-awareness itself, your feeling that you exist and your awareness of your own existence is in fact an illusion. Okay? You don't really exist. Yeah, what?
No matter what they tell me, I know that I exist.
That's all right. That's true. That, you know, but they're famous and you're not, and they're influential and you're not, and they're powerful and they're not, and they're smart. You're not smart enough to know you don't exist yet. No, it seems absurd. It's obviously absurd. Like, why should we sit around talking about such an absurd theory or such an absurd philosophy? How, you know? But you have to understand, these are not madmen who are sitting in the corner of the back of some park or something with beer bottles or wine bottles talking. These are people like B.F. Skinner, who recently gave a talk at the, you know, of all the heads of the psychologists and psychiatrists in America, practically speaking, the top people, thousands of them, and they gave him a standing ovation. Okay. Francis Crick, there's so many of them, and they're very influential. And they are having influence in our society. They're influencing how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive others, how we see ourselves and how we see others. And there's a lot of negative consequences that are going to come about from this. We don't have time to go into that now, but yeah.
Maybe the problem with these people is that they deny the existence of anything that they can't perceive.
That's right. If they can't see it, then it doesn't exist. It's not real. If you can't see it, it's not real. That's their basic problem. In other words, basically they're materialists. A materialist is someone who... they believe that there's only one energy in existence, matter. If something's not made of matter, then it doesn't exist. Okay. Now, what they've done is, as Crick said, most neuroscientists believe there's no self in the brain. What they've done, in other words, is they've gone in and dissected the brain, looking for you. Okay. They do it with living people who have epilepsy, you know, and they're playing around with their brain or whatever, finding out about these things. Looking for there's no one in there. There's just blood and this and that and little molecules here and there, right? But there's no little guy sitting there watching the whole show. You know? There is no controller. There's nobody saying, you know, I think I'll do this, or, you know, aiming that way or anything like that, okay? And since they haven't found anyone in there, they say there is no self. No one exists. Gee, you thought you were in the body, but if you say you're in the body right now and you're looking out, you say you exist, but, you know, if we go rummaging through your brain and throughout the rest of your body, we're not going to find you. Therefore, you don't exist. Okay. Their philosophy is that there's one energy, matter. And we've looked through the brain. There is no material self. If there is a self, if you do exist, you must be made of matter. If you are in your brain looking out, then you must be made of matter. So we look through it, can't find you. Therefore, there is no self.